Hello, illuminated souls. I'm Bri and Tina.
And I'm Tina Demore. Welcome to Shamans After Dark. In this series, we're going to explore the spirit realm of the ancestors, as well as our past life ancestors and our ancestors that are non-human.
It's exciting stuff. I'm looking forward to talking about this.
This is particularly near and dear to my heart, working with the ancestors. It's you really get to experience how we really are all interconnected. So yeah, I'm excited about sharing this.
So let's talk a little bit about our blood and bones ancestors, the ancestors that are actually related to us in this lifetime that we're inhabiting right now.
Yeah, blood and bones. What does that mean? It's that you're literally related to people, but it goes back generations and generations and generations and generations. And what's interesting, I mean, we think that they're going to be, you know, people say if your ancestry is from, say, Ireland or something, you think it's going to be all from Ireland. And it's very, very surprising because, you know, we can meet ancestors in the spirit world that aren't really related to us that way. But really what we're dealing with is, you know, the blessings and burdens of the energy that we carry from our blood and bones ancestors.
And I think that could be true for all of our ancestors, right? Whether it's blood and bones, past life, or even our non-human, which is always fun to explore. And we'll talk about that a little more in the podcast today. You know, and our blood and bones are definitely, we also want to think about when we're referring to it within this podcast, is that when we're saying blood and bones, we're saying those ancestors that are genetically related to us in our DNA and physical bodies that we're inhabiting right now in this lifetime.
Yes.
And so when we're talking about a past life, ancestors, because we've lived and incarnated and had life in many lives and many bodies, and that we have lived so many other potential lifetimes and had inhabited different bodies and then had different families and ancestral relationships. And we can carry the burdens, blessings, trauma, all that stuff from those past lives into this one.
From those ancestors, yeah, in those past lives. And that's to me, how many past lives have you had? Assuming listeners here believe we have past lives. I do. I've seen it in Journey and all of that. So, and I know you do too, Bri.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about your past life is someplace in the 1500s in, I don't know, Eastern Europe. We're talking about those ancestors. And so how do we carry, you know, the trauma, dramas, and blessings from that past life, from those ancestors, which is pretty fascinating.
Absolutely. And then we have our non-human ancestors, our non-human kin, which is always kind of a challenging concept sometimes for people to wrap their heads around, that maybe we have ancestors that aren't human, you know. And so I journeyed on this, and a good way to kind of explain it that might make some sense without having to blow everybody's minds. It may still blow your minds. All right. And what I got about this is that, you know, this piece of our ancestry really asks us to step outside the box of our usual perception of the world and our relationship to it. You know, we've said this before, Tina, you know, that we are connected to all living beings. We really, truly are all interconnected and all related. When we look at the world through that lens of being interconnected, we kind of start to come to understand that we do have non-human kin. The trees, the plants, the animals, they're all our kin. We're all related. We're all connected to each other. And this, in our modern world and our modern viewpoint, can be really kind of challenging for some of us to come to terms with, because it's just not something we've ever thought about or turned our minds to, you know, because people have viewed themselves as separate from, better than, or above all beings for a while now. We've always kind of felt like we're this dominant species, right? Everything is kind of beneath us, and we have the right to impose our will upon everything, which is not true.
Right. And we talked about that in our Nature Spirit series. Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, there's truly no separation. In the human species, you know, we evolved from primates. Let's go back right there. That's a non-human ancestor that we can all say we know we evolved from that.
Right.
And so it's kind of just a great example, a small example of sitting with our non-human ancestry. And the life crawled out of the water. It started somewhere.
So you could even say that our ancestors are the elements.
Yes, absolutely. I would say that. Yeah.
If you really, really try and get to this place of we're all made of oxygen and carbon, water. And so we can go on and on about that. So that's what we mean about our non-human kin.
Tina, I know you had some words, kind of an invocation that you wanted to share with everyone today as we get started and kind of diving into our ancestors.
Yes, this is a beautiful piece from Thich Nhat Hanh, The Art of Living. beautiful Zen Buddhist that just passed away at the beginning of this year. Breathing in, I see all my ancestors in me. My mineral ancestors, plant ancestors, mammal ancestors, and human ancestors. My ancestors are always present, alive in every cell of my body, and I play a part in their immortality. I love that because we really do live on. They live on through us, and our descendants will carry us on.
I love those words. And so as we talk about, we've kind of touched on the different types of ancestors we have, but there's also let's talk a little bit about, are all of our ancestors at peace? Do we, I think you and I both agree that that's not necessarily the case. Not everybody's at peace.
Right. And, I think that this is a very shamanic point of view. And I think the Judeo-Christian belief system thinks that once somebody passes away, they either go to two places, right? And if they lived a good life and they, did this A, B, and C, then they were going to live sort of in this etheric realm of peace and happiness. In shamanism, that isn't so. And that is from the indigenous people from a whole bunches of places. And in my own experience as well, personal experience in my own practice with my own ancestors. So not all of our loved ones when they pass, and this might be some, a little shocking to some people, are not automatically well and wise. They could still be kind of suffering or sort of a ghost, still sort of not even knowing that they have passed on. Sometimes they don't even know they've passed on. Sometimes they're stuck. And then even if they have gone to the afterlife, sometimes they're still attached to the suffering they had in this life. That's sort of the reason why it's so important to heal our ancestors. And, it's not just a benefit for them. It's a reciprocal relationship between, when they're suffering, we're suffering. When we're suffering, they're suffering. And when they're at peace, we feel that peace trickle down.
Yeah, whenever you do healing, you're kind of carrying it through the whole lineage from wherever that trauma was healed. And then, it carries it through to present day. And I think also, too, that we're all souls in a body here to have experiences, to grow and evolve. And that's why we come and have this life experience. And sometimes that goes better for us than other times. And I think, we also have to remember that there's still that humanness even when we pass over. And sometimes we didn't learn from those lessons. We have ancestors who struggled and didn't evolve or haven't done their own work, and being able to kind of come in and heal some of those wounds that the whole line, that deliver that healing to everyone that's come before you, is a real gift and a way of honoring and deepening your relationship with your ancestors.
And so part of the reason why our ancestors might be suffering is because we don't honor them the way that our ancestors did. And so there's this huge disconnect. We don't remember them and they feel forgotten and they're longing to be remembered, and we don't do that. And so first of all, if you're not a shamanic practitioner, you can honor your ancestor. You can put a picture of them out. You can have a picture of someone, even though you're honoring the entire line of them. You can have a picture, because pictures didn't always exist. And you can have like candle, maybe a pretty scarf over an altar, and some favorite things that you knew about this person. Maybe they liked a favorite food, or they liked a favorite spirit, like a liqueur or something. Really just honoring them. I'm sort of referring to the movie Coco when I'm saying, Disney's Coco. It gives you a pretty good idea of how we forget about them and how they really do. It does affect them. It really affects them.
Well, I think also, too, that we forget another wonderful way of honoring our ancestors and building a relationship and remembering is sharing the stories. Sharing the stories that we've heard, that our parents passed down, our grandparents passed down. Sharing those stories and keeping them alive keeps their memory alive. And I think that's something we forget about. And I, always tell my son, ask your grandparents about their stories. Ask them about the first car they got. What were their experiences? Because when they're gone, they can't share that with you. Ask them about their parents, what was it like when they grew up. That's where we get it. And we forget, because our family life has really become
nuclear.
Right. It was a big community. And it was really, our ancestors, our grandparents lived with us, we lived in kind of this community. And now it's really very nuclear. It's small. We're separated. We're around. And we forget about it. And as you're a kid, you're less interested. You don't really want to hear the stories that your grandparents have to share, but because we don't realize that that time is not promised to us. We're only given today, and to build the relationship we want to have and keep our loved ones alive in their memories and learn from their lessons and their stories. Those are teaching stories in their own way. When we can share the adventures and mishaps of our ancestors, and that keeps them alive in a sense too. And it's a beautiful way. If you're not comfortable having an altar, or maybe you don't even have photos anymore, sometimes those get lost and misplaced, but it's what you keep in your heart with them and having that engagement. And like every time I see a cherry tree, it makes me think of my grandmother because it was her favorite tree and she grew up in DC. So she was always seeing those beautiful cherry trees. So for me, that's a real connection to my grandmother, or the morning glories that I see, because my grandfather was huge with loved his garden. The man could grow anything. And I didn't inherit that gift. Necessarily.
Yes, you did.
Not really.
You have a beautiful garden.
They look cohesive. Mine's kind of like a touch and go. Plants are a little more resilient and can do their own thing. It's great.
So just as you're saying this, Bri, my grandfather was a great gardener, and I have an affinity for cherry tomatoes. And just this past week, it's so funny you mentioned this. I have a picture of him up on my ancestor altar, and I was pretty close to him. He was like, I just really loved him. He taught me so much about nature. He was funny. And he always had this twinkle in his eye. He taught me about the brownies, which are the Scottish elves. So he always had this way with kids, especially. He just was so good with them. So he grew cherry tomatoes. We would go step in the garden. We just pick them right off, pop in our mouths. And so this past week, I had a cherry tomato, popped it in my mouth, and I was like, oh yeah, what does this bring me back to? And I looked right over his picture. I'm like, hey, Grandpa.
Yeah, they still walk with us when we have those moments. My grandfather also grew regular tomatoes. And I remember he would carry me and we'd go eat them and we put a little salt on it, just eat them right out of the garden, like red. And I'm super allergic to tomatoes.
Oh, no.
So I would still eat them. And then I'd end up with this huge rash all over my face. And I still love tomatoes to this day because of that. I loved my grandfather so much and just was so close. And he was also very funny. And he used to let my sister and I sit and put makeup on him and all those my grandmother's, jewelry. She'd come into the room, we'd be sitting there and he'd be completely decked out in clip-on earrings and necklaces.
Oh, that's fantastic. Oh my God, that's great.
So
I love it.
And when we have those memories and we come back to those small things that can just trigger those memories for us, they're so alive. It's like they're right there with us, and they are inspirited and they are there with us. And even when we have hard memories.
Yes. I mean, I will tell this story. By the way, in indigenous cultures, those stories were part of the culture, and the kids were sort of told that they needed to remember these stories. We don't have that, but I do remember, my grandfather had a decline with dementia. He lived to 92, but I would say by 88, he really was in and out of consciousness. And so this time that I went to visit him in the nursing home, because it was just beyond anybody else's care. We couldn't care for him anymore. So I come into I hadn't been there. I was sick with Lyme disease for quite a while, as I think I've mentioned several times on our podcast. And so I came in and I said, hey, Grandpa. And he looked at me like he didn't recognize me. He recognized me, but he couldn't remember my name. He's like looking at me. I go, it's Tina. He goes, oh, hi. Last name? So the whole time, I don't think he really knew who I was, but he knew I was familiar because he was just talking with me. And then he said, I hadn't seen him in 2 months. And he's like, are you married yet? I'm like, no, Grandpa, but when I do get married, you'll be the first one to know. So
it's so interesting because I think those relationships really impact us in such deep ways. And, I always remembered that I, as a little girl, was like, I want to marry someone like my grandfather. That embodied those qualities of and I did in a lot of ways. My husband is funny. He's grounded. He is, he's
a good guy.
So many of those wonderful qualities, my grandfather embodied and the way that he cared for his family and all of that stuff. So it's lovely to see that gift that he gave to me of showing me. Yeah. And I think when we have the people in our lives that love us and value us, we realize that we have value and love ourselves and are worthy of being loved by someone in that way.
Yeah, and I mean, my grandmother, my paternal grandfather died before I was born, and my grandmother, my nana from Naples, Italy, she would start a sentence in English and she'd end it in Italian. So I have like little stories about her. She died when I was about 10, so I only have very limited stories, but I do know she was an amazing cook. She cooked everything from scratch, and she was also a healer. And I have many stories that have been handed down to me that I wasn't aware of um, by the time she passed away at 10 years old. But there's some amazing stories. I'm like, huh, no wonder.
And we always don't always get that. Like whether, I grew up, we traveled a lot. We were overseas most of my childhood. We lived overseas and I did not get to see my grandparents very often. I didn't realize how in ways I was robbed of being able to have deeper relationships, knowing them better, knowing their stories. I don't know enough stories about my grandparents, and neither of my parents really share a whole lot of their stories. So I feel like I'm missing these huge lines of knowledge and wisdom and stories about their struggles, what it was like to come over here to, start a life in this country, and why did they come over? Like there's just so much that's so unknown to me. And I feel like I lost the opportunity because, I wasn't in this work at that time. I didn't have the understanding of the need. It just wasn't in my family culture, right? And as a kid, you're not thinking, I want to know your stories. Or some of us don't know our family or know our stories. And I think we're always looking and want that sense of connection and deepness, and relation. We want to know where we came from, in a sense.
Hmm.
We don't always have that. And sometimes the beauty of being able to be in this work and Jewish shamanic journey so that you can meet your ancestors, understand their stories, and learn some of that
Right.
is a real gift. And also being able to do some of this healing work. And I know you've talked a lot, Tina, about well and wise ancestors. And what does that mean exactly when we talk about an ancestor that's well and wise?
That's a good question. I kind of fluffed over that. So, well and wise means an ancestor in your lineage that is not carrying the wounds that their descendants are carrying. They're not carrying, they have come to a place in the afterlife where they have healed, they have become sort of, I would say, divine in many ways. If you put them on a scale of 1 to 10, they're about 8 to 10. They're no longer suffering. They are really ready and willing to connect, help, and bless their lineage. And so those are the ones that you actually want to contact. If you're not a practitioner, I'd be a little concerned if you wanted to just contact any of your ancestors without knowing if they're sort of well and wise. But that's a deeper, I mean, this is years and years of studying. So, but what the well and wise ones are sort of like if you were looking at the lineage, and you had like a painting of it, they're lights on that line. They're lights. And so they're holding superb healing energy.
Maybe like think of them as they've ascended a bit. They came, they lived their life,
Yes.
they learned those lessons, and they grew. Their soul has gained wisdom. They aren't holding on to the woundedness they may have had within a
Right.
embodied lifetime.
Right. Yes. And so, for people, I've worked with people that are like, I don't want to work with my ancestors. Their experience of their immediate family and maybe extended family was so negative that they are very resistant to even trying to work with their ancestors. And to be quite honest, I was at that place at one time. I was like, my gosh, why do I have to take the responsibility on my family has not taken responsibility to, and I'm really speaking about my father's line, so it took me years upon years to really understand that if I didn't do this work, they were going to still be suffering, and then I would be suffering too. And just recently gotten to this place, maybe within the past year, of really being in good relationship with my father's line, which was really beautiful. I mean, it was just amazing and miraculous and beautiful. So just food for thought for people out there thinking, oh my gosh, I do not want to work with my ancestors. That line, that lineage is so, messed up or whatever. They're just a bunch of blah, blah, blah. And I just want nothing to do with them. Just know that if you do come to a place where you're like curious about it, that it could be shifted. I am like telling you that it can be really shifted, and it's really beautiful. getting tears in my eyes right now. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it's very deep work. Anytime that I've done the work or had that work done, it's really interesting because I've not always had the easiest relationships with my blood and bones family of this lifetime. And to see when healing takes place, how those subtleties in the relationships that exist now have shifted on their own because of that healing work being carried forward through those lines blows my mind on how much better my relationships have gotten within my family structure because of the healing work being done. Because it's not just you that's getting healing. Everyone in that lineage receives the healing that's living today. So, if you're healing an ancestor from a couple hundred years ago in your family line, that comes all the way forward to everybody in the lineage living today. So you aren't just healing yourself. You're healing potentially your children. You're healing, your cousins, everyone related in the line that may be impacted and carrying that trauma, which is a really huge gift to your family.
Right. And another thing too, so in shamanism, the way we were taught and trained, you need explicit permission to do healing on people. And with ancestors, I just want to be clear, obviously they're in spirit and they're needing healing, and you go and work with a helping spirit and the well and wise ancestors to bring about that healing. So it's not really you not respecting their boundaries. The trickling effect from that healing in the spirit world will sort of come down to all those cousins and extended family. It's not that you're doing a direct healing on them. It's an indirect healing.
Right. It's because you're healing the family line. So they kind of get the benefits of the healing work that's being done. It's almost like you see, like you have, if you look at your family tree, there's like small fractures in the branches because of woundedness or healing. And what is actually happening there is when you are having ancestral healing is being done, you're doing it or someone else is doing it for you, you see those wounds heal. And then that fracture is no longer there. So it's like a stronger branch. Everyone benefits from that work being done. Everyone's a little stronger for it. That trauma isn't being carried forward anymore. It's not being passed down. And it's really beautiful. It can be very subtle work. Sometimes that ripple effect is very, 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 very subtle. And other times it's a little more profound, depending on the wounds that are being healed and the trauma.
Right. And, another thing too is that we hadn't mentioned, like there are generational curses, and we're not going to talk about curses, but when that's lifted as well, if you know how to do curse work and there is a curse on your family line from whatever reason, when that's unraveled, it creates an amazing ripple effect. It's lovely.
Yeah, it allows you to kind of really be here in your full vibration because you aren't carrying or kind of constrained within either old traumas or curses or things like that we may have been carrying forward and inherited without even realizing it, right? That we come in, because we all come in with our full song and vibration. Sometimes life in a body is tricky and there are things we navigate, but maybe we navigate those things because there's learning that we need to have take place as well around some of that. So Tina, what does spirit have to say about our ancestors who have passed and are well and wise?
Well, my helping spirits and possibly the ancestors spoke around this as sort of a group message. The ancestors who are well and wise have moved beyond their earthly experience. So like ascending, like you said before. When we say earthly experience, we are speaking of the suffering that they carried throughout their lives. They were honored by their descendants. And in doing that, the reciprocity of the relationship bolstered the advancement of the ancestors who have connected to their predecessors, who in turn have also healed them. The disconnect a person feels, even in the afterlife, from his or her or their lineage, living and non-living, can create more suffering. This concept speaks to the power of healing through connecting with the ones who have walked before us and who are beneficial to our lives here on earth, and vice versa. We are indeed all one. If suffering exists, it is felt and carried by the whole.
Beautiful. I love that. It gives me goosebumps.
Yeah, I don't even remember writing this.
I don't either. So I'm going to, I'm about to share this. And all I can remember is that we were kind of sitting in council with my helping spirits and ancestors. And it was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And they shared with me, ancestors who are well and wise are ancestors that have done their work. When they were living, they learned from their mistakes and from their life experiences. When they returned to spirit, they carried their lessons with them and were able to grow as a result, their soul evolving, advancing from that life experience in a body, which means they are a light, a wisdom keeper of your lineage who can help you if you call upon them.
Oh, I love that. Wisdom keeper of your lineage. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I thought that was really striking.
It's funny, we never remember what we've kind of channeled through from our helping spirits or ancestors for these parts of our podcast.
I know. It's always like a gift to receive the wisdom again.
It really is. It's like, oh yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So our website journey prompt at shamansafterdark.com is ask your helping spirit to take you to meet a non-human ancestor, which will be a really cool exploration, I hope.
Yeah, it might be really surprising.
Yeah.
I've done that journey myself. Kind of blows your mind. And then you come back and you think about, I see little traits there in this lifetime that pop up from that.
Yeah. And I think this will be great. I hope people drop us a line, let us know, what they'd like us to cover in future episodes, or just commenting on what they thought about our, past episodes. So yeah, please drop us a line at shamansafterdark.com.
You can also find us on Facebook at Shamans After Dark.
And Instagram.
Exactly. So please drop us a line, communicate, let us know. We'd love to hear from you. Until next time, everyone, keep on shining your light.